All right. Well, today is Tuesday, April 26th, and we are almost done with this semester. This is my favorite program to post. The information that you get from these beautiful students who have worked so hard is awesome because you all know I tell you a lot of stuff and you don't always believe me. And I know it's okay. You don't always believe me, but you believe these people. You believe these students who've been there and done it, and you can say, yeah, it's real. So I'd rather you get it from somebody. So I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we will open the floor for some questions. And maybe what we do is what's one of the most important things you're excited about after you tell us who you are. So take it away, Maysen.
Okay, my name is Maysen Smith. I majored in health sciences. I'm from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I'm going to Rocky Vista University in Southern Utah.
My name's Morgan, and I'm from Boise, and I did a health science degree and going to be attending University of Washington.
Great. And we will have hopefully Kylie McGee. She was our past president of biology major, and she is going to the University of Utah. So hopefully she'll be able to jump on as soon as she can. Maysen, tell us what's the most important thing you're most excited about in starting medical school.
In starting, I think moving to a new city is a little exciting with warmer weather and meeting new people. Probably.
I would say I'm most excited about just meeting my classmates and being able to form a new little study group and little family in med school. So I'm excited.
Very cool.
New restaurants.
Yes, yeah.
All right, I'm opening the floor. What questions do you have for these medical students? They could range from anything in regards to the application process to what they did to prepare for medical school. Ask away. Yes, we have someone in the in-person room. Say your name.
My name's Lisa, and so I'm assuming neither of you guys did gap years.
I think you both did gap years.
Yeah.
I took one.
I took 2 years actually. I was planning on applying in 2020, but that was when the pandemic was happening and decided to take that time off. Yeah, so it was longer than anticipated.
So that kind of has like my follow-up questions, like what was the reasoning behind the gap year? And I guess like COVID was both your reasonings.
Well, Maysen, what was your reason behind gap year?
One of my reasons was, well, one, I was ill prepared. I didn't realize initially, like junior year, that it was a year of applications. I didn't realize it took a whole year till you find out if you got accepted. So when I realized that by senior year, I'm like, well, I guess I'm taking a gap year then. But I also, in hindsight, I'm really thankful I did. I got to work full time, kind of take some time off and travel a little bit, which was something I realized I wanted to do before med school, but it's definitely, I'm glad that I did in hindsight.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend a gap year. At least for me, it was really nice because I got to spend time with family, work full time, kind of improve my application on things that I didn't feel like I was very strong in my application at. So that was nice to be able to kind of like reinforce what I was doing and take more time to like process everything. Because applying to medical school is very stressful. It's like a full-time job in itself. And so it was nice to have that gap year, like she said, traveling and doing all the stuff you can't do when you're in school. So,
and it might seem daunting, like, oh, I don't want to take a whole year off of school and then have to go into medical school where it's like drinking from a fire hose. But I think, I mean, there's people who have children who go to med school 8 years out of school and they do it. So I think it's worth it. I would also recommend it.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Other questions? If you want to, you can raise your hand. If you want to do it verbally, or if you need to put it in the chat, you can do that as well. So, Molly?
Yeah, I can ask one.
Oh,
So,
we did get one.
oh, okay. I didn't say mine yet.
Please do.
Yeah.
So Brandy wants to know if you went through any internships. Did you go through any internships? And if so, how did you apply? Maybe Maysen, you can start with yours.
Yeah, interesting enough, my sophomore year at the pre-med panel here, one of the panelists was a scribe at an orthopedic clinic, and they took interns. And so that's how I got my internship. She gave me her email and I reached out to her. And from that internship, I now scribe there. So that's how I got my job. And that was like one of my biggest experiences on my application as well. So I guess for me, it was just through like knowing people and going to stuff like this. Like, I think that's important. Reaching out to clinics too. Like, it depends on what internship you're talking about, but mine was like a hands-on patient experience where you're rooming patients, things like that. And so that was really helpful in one, having, you know, that activity on your application, but also like reinforcing this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. So I think also like Kelsey Nelson is really helpful in that regard. I think you could reach out to her, see if she knows anyone in the area who has internship opportunities. And I would just really reach out to people, and you're probably not, you're gonna have to reach out multiple times before you get an answer, but just keep doing it for sure.
And which one do you work for? What's your-
Taji Orthopedics.
So Taji is an orthopedic internship, and we host it every fall, spring, and summer. It's 2-credit internship, so you get it 4 credit. That's another opportunity. Morgan, maybe you could share a little bit about yours.
I actually didn't do an internship.
Yes, but you did something else.
Which one? I'm like.
So let's talk about both. Let's talk about your research experience, and then maybe you could talk a little bit about your job.
Okay, yeah, so I've done a couple of research experiences actually. So my first one was I researched with NASA, and I moved to Huntsville, Alabama for the summer. Was doing chemical engineering stuff, so I had no experience in it, but I did learn everything there throughout the summer, and it was really, really rewarding. The second one was actually research at Boise State. So if you know Dr. Tinker, I was in her lab working on microbiology things, and I loved that one. It was super fun. It was also over the summer. And as far as like research goes, my suggestion would be if you have a teacher or a subject that you really like, just ask them if they're doing any research or if you can be involved in it. That would be like my biggest recommendation. Also talking to Erin, because she is the one that helped me find the one with Dr. Tinker. So, and then my current job that I'm doing right now is working at Eagle Vision One. So I'm a scribe and an optometric technician. So I help the doctors there get patients ready, do testing, and then scribing. And yeah, it's really fun. I like that a lot.
Okay, and the research opportunity that Morgan did was through our Dr. Ralph Jones Fellowship, and it is an application process, and you do it in the summer. It's a 10-week full-time 400-hour opportunity, and Zara is also in the room. She did it last summer. We have selected our fellows for this summer, so if any of you are interested in doing that the next summer, we usually put those applications out in February. So, and the Taji orthopedic one comes out pretty regularly because we do it every semester.
Right.
So if you're watching my emails, you usually get that information. So Molly, you had a question.
Yeah, so I wanted to know how you guys went about deciding like where to apply and kind of like researching different medical schools and like which factors were most important for where you decided to go.
Yeah, sure. So I remember Erin, when I was going to all of her advising appointments, she recommended looking into different medical schools that I was interested in, finding the criteria, finding the prerequisites and all of that. So that was really helpful to kind of start the search. But I would say once I had like my MCAT score, I knew what my GPA was, and all of my experiences were kind of like solidified and I was done with them. That's when I really started researching more into med schools and seeing what schools also were in line with my scores and my experiences and what they valued. So I would say most of like the schools that I researched were after I graduated, after I had my scores, just so I could find something that was realistic. I didn't want to apply to schools that my score wasn't even in the range. And so it was helpful to start there.
For me, I had like a different experience where when I was researching med schools, I didn't know my MCAT score. I had an idea what my GPA was going to be, but I hadn't gotten all my activities. You know, I wasn't fully there yet where I could research schools in that way. So I was definitely keen on places in the Northwest. I wanted to stay in the Northwest. I wanted to be near family. I didn't think I would succeed on the East Coast. So I stayed in this area predominantly. Some schools out there just because I liked, you know, their programs, but not majority Northwest. And I submitted my primary application before I had my MCAT score just because you have to get your application verified, and that's a whole other process of like a month to 6 weeks, 6 to 12. It totally depends on when you submit, but you want it to be verified before it can be sent out to schools. So once I got my MCAT score back, I only submitted secondaries to schools that I thought were in the range of my MCAT score. So that's a way to do it. I mean, it costs money, but it's a money pit anyways. So might as well just lose that, you know, $500 that it was. But so I did it based on region and where I thought I would succeed near family and things like that.
We had a question about the gap year and deciding when to take your MCAT. How did you go about making that decision if you were going to have a gap year? When's the best time to take your MCAT?
Sure. So I took my MCAT in May, knowing that I was going to apply that cycle. So the application opens in like mid-May. I took it May 20th of last year and got my score back June 20th, but I'd already submitted my primary. So I kind of like knew at that time, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna submit my primary before I get my MCAT score back, regardless of what it is, and then submit my MCAT score, and then I'll get my secondaries. I started studying, I was still in school when I studied for my MCAT. I wasn't during my gap year. So that was really difficult. I don't recommend that. I did not get a great score, and I attribute it to not doing full-time MCAT studying. But I started in January, so I studied for 6 months, and I think it really depends on how much you spend time on it rather than the duration, because I did 6 months and I got sub 500. So I think you should take it in your gap year if you're gonna for like 3 months studying, and then take it before the application cycle opens, or like, you know, you're going to get your score close to when early in the application cycle, so you can submit early, which is important.
So I took the MCAT twice. The first time I was definitely not prepared. I took it in September and I was planning on applying the cycle already late. So I don't recommend that at all. The second time, I believe I took it in the spring, and it was for the coming up cycle. And I definitely recommend that just because you get your score before you submit your application. So you kind of can narrow down your med school search and see what schools, like I said, you think you're qualified for, or you fall in that range of their scores. But I would say just like setting aside a good chunk of time. I took 3 months because I knew for me, if I studied longer than that, I wouldn't retain the information that I studied at the beginning. So each time I studied was 3 months, but it really just depends on like your studying strategies and how best you learn. The first time I studied for the 3 months was terrible. I didn't learn anything. The second time was very, very helpful. So you definitely learn. And if you have to take the MCAT more than once, it's totally fine. Everyone does it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I would just add to it from an advisor perspective. So the cycles, the way that they work is you do apply a year in advance. So if you
Right.
want to go in fall of 2022, this coming fall, you would have applied last summer. And so typically you just need to be aware that your MCAT score is only good for 3 years. So you want to take your MCAT as close to your application as possible. So a gap year individual, a true gap year like Maysen, where you graduate, you're right in the application process. And so you are taking your MCAT sometime between May and July.
Right.
And you want to do it in that time frame so that you get your score back. You can blind submit like Maysen chose to do, which means that she didn't have her score. So she submitted her application so it would get through the processes that it has to go through and get to the school. And the only thing they're waiting for is your score, your MCAT score. You can blind submit to one school and then go back and add schools later so that you're not paying a bunch of money And so those are options, whereas Morgan, for example, took it and it wasn't as strong as she would have liked, so she took more time to study. And then she took it right before the cycle started. She was not in school, so she was able to manage a March or April test date.
Right.
If you're in school, it's hard to manage and multitask that. If you're taking more than one gap year, you do want it to be as close to your application as possible, right? Because you don't want your score to go expired and have to retake it. So hopefully that answered that question. What other kinds of questions do we have for these lovely ladies? Yeah, Elise.
How do you guys incorporate your like personal like activities, like your own hobbies? Like if you, I don't know if you guys do like your own like a cooking club or something, but like how do you like materialize that?
So the question that we're asking is about hobbies and activities, those extracurricular things that maybe weren't like
Medicine.
volunteerism and patient exposure and some of those things.
Right.
How did you incorporate those in your application? And a really great question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I absolutely think you should. I think your application should not just be everything you've done medicine-wise. It should be like a full picture of who you are. And so I think it's really important to do that. And what you do is just in your activities section, you just add that, like my cooking hobby. And then I think for hours, I don't know what I did for hours.
What did you
What
put
did I
for,
do?
what did you do for your hobbies?
I did, so I go to Orange Theory as like at my gym. That is kind of a hobby of mine. So I put that. I put like the silliest little things. I put slacklining, like things that I do. That was one of the major things I did to de-stress during my MCAT. So I thought that was really important to add in. What else did I put? Rock climbing. I really just put everything that like encompassed who I am rather than just, this is why I'm going to be a doctor. This is why I want to be a doctor, kind of like a robotic, like I only do things related to medicine, because we don't all do that. So I think it's important to incorporate that too, so they can get a whole vision of who you are.
Morgan, what did you put on yours? What were yours?
So I actually have like a little side business that I do of flipping furniture. So I go to like thrift stores, get furniture, and then I redo them and then I sell them. And that's kind of how I like made money throughout school too. And so I put that as one of my hobbies on there. I think I only had like one of those type of hobbies on my application, but I had a lot of like volunteer work that wasn't medically related at all. Like Book It Forward was an organization I volunteered with. And so I did a lot of hours with them and I put that on there. And I think the point of having those hobbies is to show that you are a well-rounded individual and that you're not just good at medicine, you can communicate with the patient. And so it's really important to have those hobbies on your application, because if you just have science and medicine stuff, they're going to be like, okay, what else do you like to do? Like, can you hold a conversation with the patient? Can you interact with people in your team? And so it's important to have those things in those, and for them to know like you have activities to de-stress as well. So I definitely recommend putting them on there, and it can be something as silly as like mine flipping furniture, but it's yeah, and those are the things they actually asked about on like my interviews, where it's kind of those unique things that they don't see on every single application. So it's really important.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it makes you more memorable when they're flipping through applications like, oh, well, this person likes kayaking. Like they pick up on stuff like that. And I think, yeah, they ask about stuff that aren't medicine a lot of times in interviews. So yeah.
And I would just, as an advisor added value, I would also say that what's really important is you be aware you're becoming a physician. That's the profession you're going into. And physicians need work-life balance. And you need to demonstrate that to them in your application, that you understand that even being a student, you need to have things that you do that are just for you. And I really hope that you all are listening to them. They have all been intentional about their choices. I don't think there's a certain anything that Morgan or Maysen have done that hasn't been a choice for them. In other words, it's something they wanted to do and they learned something from it and they were able to orchestrate that. So we have a question about personal statements. How many drafts did you do personal statements?
Yeah, I cannot tell you how many drafts, but that's so important. Like you need that many drafts. You need multiple eyes on it. I think it's important to have someone who knows you look at it and kind of read it and be like, yeah, this sounds like you. And then someone who knows like the medicine side and can say like, well, you need to add more why, which was like my biggest thing, was like, why are you doing this? Why did you do that? Why did, you know, that's the hardest thing to articulate. Someone who knows the medicine side, who knows that patient cycle, what they're looking for. You need multiple eyes on it, and even like multiple people who know the medicine side as well, and just get their input. I probably had 10 plus drafts.
Yeah, I had too many drafts to count, and I think that's just part of the process. It's each time you do a draft, it's getting better and better, and your why is becoming more and more clear. So if you don't have multiple drafts, it's almost like you just wrote something down, and it doesn't really represent you. You have to think about it, and each draft is you thinking about it and deciding like, this is why I want to be in medicine, and it's becoming more clear to yourself too. Also, having multiple people look at it was really, really helpful. But I kind of ran into having too many people look at it that didn't know the medicine side of things or hadn't been through the application. So like for family members, I just had them read it for like grammatical errors or making sure things like flowed nicely through the essay, but then had like Erin revise mine for actual content.
Yeah.
And so just knowing like what type of people are reviewing your application is helpful too, because your mom's gonna love it, and so she's gonna tell you it's great, but does it actually
Submit
fit?
it right now.
Yeah, is she like actually looking at it for content or just, you know, being proud of you? And so it's helpful to kind of choose who you want to read your essays in your personal statement, because that is super important.
And as an advisor, what I would also share is I think that both of them would agree that you can't be married to any one draft, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you go off a different direction and you can't be married to it. You can't commit to this is it, this is the only one, because
Yeah.
you grow and change the speed. Right. I think for Morgan, for example, she had originally started one personal statement, and then a year later she's back at it. She realized it was a completely different statement to write.
Right.
So don't be married to it. Do lots of drafts and have good readers. Be selective about your readers. I would just, as a shameless plug, and Shannon and I both read them. We are here all summer long, and Maysen and Morgan hit me up regularly for reads, and sometimes we met and talked things out. The Career Services Office, Kelsey Nelson reads them, Kelly Gould reads them. You could have positions that you know, just be careful about how long that position has been out in the workforce.
Yeah.
Because the application process has dramatically changed from when they applied. And so you could get some bad advice, not by their intention of trying to give you bad advice, it's just they're giving you advice that they knew.
Right.
So don't do that. So what other questions do we have?
And I was also definitely guilty of being married to drafts. Like I would send it to people and I'm like, they give me feedback. I'm like, absolutely not. Like, love that sentence. You're not right. And then would later be like, okay, maybe I should just like step back a little bit. You'll probably learn that you'll do that too, but definitely take everything with, you know, a grain of salt and just be like, okay, they're trying to better me. Like they're not trying to knock me down with my sentence. It makes sense.
You will all discover you will have a love-hate relationship with me, because I'm pretty
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
And
But that
put
was
on
so
purpose.
helpful.
Put on purpose. I want to be hard on you all because I want you to have your best. And have your best interests in mind is what I want. So what other questions do we have? Either chat, vocal, in person? They're a captive audience for you.
What was the most like stressful or like nerve-wracking part of the whole like application process and all that?
The most nerve-wracking part of the application process.
I know mine will write after an interview.
Yeah.
Waiting to hear those 6 weeks they tell you. Yeah, to 1 year plus, which is an exaggeration. It feels like forever. And those I feel like for me, like I got an interview and I'm like, oh my gosh, like my confidence was like so high. Then after the interview, it just completely went down, like not hearing anything. Don't check Student Doctor Network, whatever you do. Like it was hard after the interview. I think that was the most I was like mentally and Yeah, that was the hardest.
So what Mason's takeaway was there's a lot of waiting.
There's a lot of waiting.
Morgan?
Mine was actually pretty quick, but I would still say after the interview is the most stressful part, because then you have time to actually think about all your responses and you're like, oh my gosh, that sounded so weird. Why did I say that? And so like my best tip is after an interview, like don't think about it anymore. Go do something to take your mind off of it, because you're gonna overthink all your answers and you can't change them. And so that was definitely the worst part.
So true.
Yeah, and I think like each of my interviews that I did, I got results, or like they told me if I was accepted within a week. And so I think it just depends on the school.
Not my experience.
Yeah.
So let me ask this question. How many, Mason, if you're willing to share, how many schools did you apply to in your primary?
In my primary, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was like 25.
Did you apply both MD and DO, or did you
Yes.
just apply MD or DO?
Yes, both.
Okay, Morgan, how many schools did you apply to in your primary?
25 as well. I did 5 DO and then 20 MD because I got, I don't even remember what it is, but
The
sometimes.
financial assistance program?
Yes, yeah. And so I figured might as well apply and use all the financial assistance they gave me.
Okay, and then how many secondaries did you complete, Mason?
Oh, man. Probably like 10 to 13.
Okay, Morgan?
I only did 5 because I wasn't too happy with my MCAT score. And so I only wanted to go through the secondaries on the schools that I knew I had a good chance of getting into.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
And then-
applied to more DO, so that's why I did more.
Mason, how many interviews did you have?
I had 2 interviews.
Morgan?
I had 3.
Okay, were they all virtual?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody want to ask more interview questions? I have another question on there. I saw it, Shannon. But we're on the topic of interviews. What kinds of questions do we want to know about the interviews? Jackson?
Sorry, I had to remember how to use Zoom. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah?
Yes.
Nice. I guess I'm just kind of curious, were there any questions that you seem to get like a lot of or in the interviews, or were there any questions that were like kind of out of left field that you didn't expect? In the
So
interview?
common questions that you got while interviewing.
Most common one, which is the hardest in my opinion, is tell me about yourself. That one is terrible to prepare for, and every single interview will ask
Okay,
that.
I think I blacked out in all my interviews. I'm trying to remember. One that I did get that I think is going to be a very common one in all interviews that I kind of like was taken back about is like, that I got in both interviews was how, trying to remember how it was worded, but how you are going to contribute to diversity as a physician. And I was like, oh shoot, that one was rough for me. And another question, tell me about yourself, is terrible, always terrible. And then I
I
got a lot of
wonder why I
ethical
asked that
scenarios.
question at MMI. I wonder why I asked that
Yes.
question at MMI. Oh, I know.
Yeah,
It comes
it's
up
every,
time.
yeah, because it's like an opener, like, okay, so tell us about yourself.
Mhm.
And so it's really open-ended, but. a lot of
Weirdest
ethical-
question you got?
Weirdest, probably like an ethical scenario, yeah.
And I would say each interview is totally different depending on the school. So for me, it was really helpful to look at like Student Doctor Network to see like what kind of questions were being asked to other students. And so
Yeah.
like one interview was more like based on my application and like asking questions about my experiences, which is super easy. You can talk about that all day long.
Right.
Versus my other one was more like scenarios and how would you respond in certain circumstances. And I think that is really hard, and like ways you would want to improve medicine, or I'm trying to think of others. Work-life balance was another one that I got asked in each interview. Yeah, so it totally just depends on the school too. Like one was more stressful than the other.
We had a question that revolved around whether you got to choose if you did a virtual or an in-person interview. And this year it was not a choice. Next year, it depends on the school. Some of the schools are going back complete in-person, no choice. Some are going hybrid, and some are staying virtual. So it really just depends, I think, on where the school is from. the area and how they're willing to try and create a good, healthy way to not create barriers. But, you know, there's something to be said about an in-person interview because then you get to see the campus and you get to kind of do that. But maybe you both could talk a little bit about the interview day because it's not just like one little blip in the moment, right? You have a full experience, don't you? So maybe, Maysen, why don't you tell us a little bit about Rocky Vista's interview style? What was the day like?
So again, both my interviews were very different. Like Morgan said, Rocky Vistas was like a 45-minute call for Zoom call with two of the faculty where they just told me about or asked me about my application. And the nice thing about that interview was they were very complimentary of my application, which gave me more confidence and I felt like I could speak more freely and I wasn't so like tight and things. But I actually, one of my biggest things for me was I was so nervous about the background that was in my, like what they could see on the Zoom call and my lighting. So I actually did my interview at work in my boss's office. He has like beautiful like wood and things like that, and like has like his like doctorate degrees in the back. So it looked good. And the lighting was like feasts on you. So that's why I chose where I was and I'm comfortable there. So I did it there and went to work afterwards because only 45 minutes. So
So the other one you said was a little bit different.
it was very different. It was like 6 hours long, but it's because the actual interview was like 30, but then they spent like an additional 4 hours going over, you know, the curriculum and the, you know, the questions like student panels and stuff like that, which I found to be super draining. It was my first interview and you just sit there like, you know, like that for a very long time. And so after that, I was like, oh my gosh, that was a lot. And then Rocky Vistas was like amazing because it was only 45 minutes. So
Yeah. And in a typical in-person interview, you are going to have a day where you're going to actually get to see the campus and have a tour and you'll talk to other students and you might have multiple different types of interviews. I think with the virtual environment, that's kind of been muted a little bit depending on the school,
right.
but it's an intentional thing to give you a chance to be exposed to other folks. And I always tell students when you're on an interview, no matter what, you don't have to have like the perma smile, but
Yeah.
I think you have to be polite to those that are the small peoples. You know, like if someone is entering you into a room and communicating with you and you're rude to them, it's going to come off really, really bad. Morgan, what was your interview like?
So my interview at Icon was like a whole half-day thing, curriculum, going over financial costs, and then getting a chance to like ask questions to current students. And then in that like 4 or 5 hour span of time, they would have your 30-minute interview. And so you would just hop off one and go on to another Zoom. And that is really draining to like sit on a computer screen, make sure everything looks perfect, make sure you're always connected, and then be ready for your interview too. And so that part was like very draining. That was like, after that, I just wanted to sleep all day. And then my one at UW was totally different. So they just had your 30-minute interview and then they had all of the other type of like introductory stuff pre-recorded online. And so you could watch that at any point. That one I think was a little bit better because then you could fully prepare for just that 30-minute interview portion. And I will say, if you guys are getting an option to do virtual or in person, it would be very, very helpful to see the campus, see if you could imagine yourself there, interact with other students that are maybe currently there or that are applying, interacting with faculty. And I will say this is the 3rd year, I guess, now that they're doing virtual. So they expect a higher standard for your virtual interviews now. They've been through a couple of cycles of it. So you need to be prepared with lighting, audio, make sure your background is very clean and professional, no sound in the background, all of those type of things, making sure you're looking into the camera versus looking at your screen. So all those little things that you don't really think about, that's their only impression of you through a virtual interview versus in person, you get a lot of other things added to it. So
Body language.
yes,
things like
yeah.
that.
So I don't know, for me, it'd be very helpful to do an in-person if you get a choice,
Yes.
but I know it's more expensive.
It's so
Um,
expensive. That's the.
Before you, go ahead.
What questions did you ask them?
Ooh, that's a good question too. Look at you, rock star.
So do as much research about the school as you can. If there's any like weird things about the school that you come across, ask them about that. Or if there's like a certain, I know at ICOM, they have like a separate program where you can complete a master's degree while you're in med school. So things that show that you're like interested in their curriculum, interested in their like atmosphere at school, things like that are really helpful. So do as much research as you can and pick out like really interesting things about the school that you would like to participate in, that you genuinely want to know more about.
And be careful, like when you do look at their website and stuff, that you're not asking questions that are answered on the website, because that, you know, it just makes it look like you looked at the website so you can ask questions and then it's like easily answered online. One thing that Rocky Vista gave me the option to is they told me who my interviewers were going to be. And so I researched them and got to ask them a lot of questions about their careers and why they chose their certain paths and about their research and things like that. So that was really helpful. For Kansas City was the university was the other one that I had. For them, they also have like the MPH, which is the Masters of Public Health. And they also have an MBA program, which I asked a lot about, and like how you apply to it. Is it like in the semesters or however? Because that was something I was interested in. So yeah, I like the programs. It's really a good thing to ask. But asking about like curriculum and stuff that's going to be answered in the interview too is I would steer away from.
And for my interview with UW, they actually put out like in one of their emails, they don't want you to ask questions to the interviewers. They wanted you to email questions. And so like that was kind of weird. I wasn't expecting that. And they didn't really look at like what questions I was asking. They just wanted to ask questions during that 30-minute period, which seems like a long time, but really it's just a couple of questions they're asking you. And so I think it totally depends on the school too. Like I was not expecting them to like not want questions. So it's kind of interesting.
Definitely.
So a couple of things real quick with the interview process, and then we'll move into a couple of these other questions that have been posted. One, you have an abundance of resources here at Boise State University to support you on the interview process. We do twice a year MMI mock interviews. You can participate in those as observers and as interviewees. We also have the career services. They do free mock interviews for alumni and staff throughout the year, and students. You don't even have to be here. They can do the virtual kind of mock interview thing. Make sure you read through the interview process on the medical school's website because they share that information. They're very transparent about that. The last one is to be taken with a grain of salt. StudentDoctor.net is great to get some ideas for interviewing, but it can be nerve-wracking because not everybody is on there with the same kind and considerate and compassionate reasons for being there. They're there to pitch a fit. So keep those things in mind. You can kind of root those out. You're like, ooh, that person has an in for that school. There are some schools that will not release their interview questions. And so like when you go to interview, they'll make you sign a disclaimer. University of Utah does that with their MMI questions. You're not allowed to see those. But you need to be educated. The other piece is that we do we're doing interview preparation workshop every spring. It's been recorded both times we've done it, and it's posted on our advising website. It's great. Kelsey and Kelly from Career Services put it on, and we support them, and we host it. We go through all the different interview styles, ways to prepare. It's not about being rehearsed. It's about being genuine, real, And it is, I would say, also about them getting to know you. They're not trying to mess with you. They're not trying to shake your tree and make you feel miserable. They want to know who you are and what makes you tick. And so that is what's most important, is knowing yourself. A lot of students will read their applications before they go into interview. And if you are doing a virtual interview, I really value what Maysen and Morgan have said about their space, making sure that you know what your virtual space looks like. So for example, I'm just going to pick on Zara and Jackson because they have white backgrounds. Freddie, you have a really good background. You know, you don't want things to distract, right? You don't want them looking at those things instead of looking at your beautiful faces and listening to you. And then the other is camera eye contact, right? Like you can't look at the screen, you need to look at the camera. So you stick a little sticky on the camera, so you stare at the sticky and you get to enjoy that. So, all right, we have a couple questions. Miss Shannon is hot caking them pretty good. All right, so the question is, what is one thing you wish you would have done differently? Ooh,
I'll have to think about that. Hold on here.
I know, me too.
Shannon stumped her. Good job, Shannon.
I would say maybe just being more prepared about like the actual application process. It's a lot of work to fill out the application that I wasn't aware of, and it takes a lot of time. And if you are already applying late in the cycle, having that done beforehand, I wish I would have done differently. I wish I would have had like my personal statement in there and my list of 15 activities already written in, and then had all my grades and things compiled, because you have to input manually all of your classes and all of your grades for all of college. And just having that information and gathering it, I wish I would have done that before, because it would have saved a ton of time.
I've never said that before, not once.
Yes, listen to Aaron.
But it's true. I think that it sneaks up on you. I think that, you know, in all retrospect, you probably thought, gosh, I can put this all together. And then you get in there and you're like, oh, this takes a lot more time than I thought it did. And I have all these other things going on in my life, like working full time, and doing some of those things can surprise you. And it's not anything against you. It's just that, you know, I think there's a naivety to applying that you just have the first time you apply.
Yeah.
And then once you get in there, you're like, oh, I could totally rock this if I had to do it again, right? Like you'd be like, oh, I know what I need to do and get the things all together. Did you think of yours, Maysen?
I think more of like reflection on myself is I wish that I was more positive during the application cycle. I was so hard on myself
Yes,
about every single little thing. And like waiting for interviews, like I checked my email every 20 minutes. Like that is not something you should be doing. You will not be happy. And so I wish that I kind of just took a step back from the application. It's impossible, like to just be like, oh, I'm just not going to think about it. Like it's just in the back of my mind. It is always in the forefront of your mind, but I wish that I would have just given myself the credit. Like I am good enough. Like I will get into school. I mean, this cycle or next. And so I think for you guys, I think it's important to just know, like, you worked so hard to get here, like give yourself that grace. That's what I would have done differently.
All right. Other questions? Shannon has one more she threw out there. Oh, she must have deleted it. She changed her mind. Okay.
They kind of answered it, so.
Oh, that's what you see how you are. Other questions?
Did you guys self-study for the MCAT, or did you guys use like a program?
Good question. So the question was did these individuals choose to self-study or do a course? Maysen.
I did a course. I did it through Blueprint. Yeah, they are great if you. So for me, I thought, okay, I need a schedule. I need someone else to make me a schedule and figure it out for me in a 6-month span. And which was nice on, I guess, having the schedule. But the one con about that was that I didn't realize that I was supposed to be like doing like practice tests at the same time. It was mostly content review, like every single day. And in hindsight, I feel like you should do that and then do like practice questions kind of separately. And
Like a course.
yeah, but I wish I didn't do a course. So I wish that I would have just researched more on how to self-study and more efficiently, and did it that way. Because by the end of the 6 months, I wasn't even using the course anymore, and it's really expensive. So I think you should really figure out what you want to do, really research the course. What does it give you? What is it missing? The nice thing about the blueprint course that I bought is it also gave me all of the AAMC stuff. So I didn't have to buy that separately, which was really nice. So make sure you know what it's giving you, how much it costs, obviously, like things like that. And if it's going to work for you in the long run, and how you should study for the MCAT, things like that. Because I kind of was naive to the whole studying and then kind of just impulsively bought that course. So
Morgan.
I will say, applying to medical school is very expensive, and I spent $1,500 on a self-paced Kaplan course and did not use it for like over 5 days. It was the biggest waste of money. So my biggest takeaway is get books, and don't just get like one set of books. I got Kaplan and Exam Cracker because one is going to be great, but maybe the other one on different subjects is going to be better. And so the first time I was studying for the MCAT, it was more like content review, and I was reading chapters and answering the questions in the back of the book, but that's when I did terrible. The second time around, I just bought, I think it was called UWorld, which is like a question type website, and I got like question type books, and my studying was answering questions, and whatever questions I missed, I'd go through the content from that. And so I think that can be a little bit limited if maybe your content review is lacking, but that was how my score improved like over 10 points. And so, yeah, I would just recommend the books. Don't buy a course. It's a big waste of money. Just get a study group and get the books and maybe like a couple of question packages or something. The AAMC's question packets are really, really helpful too.
yeah, and they're really hard.
Yes,
So
they are.
it's nice when you go on the MCAT and you're like, oh, that was an easier question than I usually get.
Yes.
Well, and keep in mind, this is individual too, because I think there
Right.
are some people that might say, of course, was really beneficial for them.
Right.
But here's what I would do. I wanted 2 things. Number 1, Morgan, what's underneath the desk?
Oh, yes, I have all of my Kaplan books, so the whole set. That was the only helpful thing that came out of me purchasing the course. So if anyone would like to buy the Kaplan set, they're all brand new, not written in or highlighted in. I am selling those ones, and then I have a couple Exam Cracker, I think it's 101 passages and questions, and that was super, super helpful. They're also like brand new, haven't been written in. So if anyone's interested in those, I am selling them very discounted just because I want to get rid of them. I don't want to see them anymore.
So I will put Morgan's email address in the chat, and you guys can connect and get with Morgan and figure out if you want to purchase those. The second piece I would share with you is there's a reason why Morgan has the Exam Crackers to begin with.
Yes.
So Boise State University's College of Health Science Advising Office has a lending library. We have Exam Crackers. We have Kaplan, we have Blueprint, we have Altius, we have Princeton Review. You can come and check those books out for 2 weeks. Like you can take a biology subject from Kaplan and you can check one out from Exam Crackers, and you can compare. What does this one give me? And what does this one give me? Does this one make more sense than this one does? Morgan and I met, and I said, hey, maybe you want to take my Exam Cracker set with you and play with it for a couple of weeks. And she did. And she brought it back and she said, I'm buying Exam Crackers. It's a win-win for me. And so you can a la carte that. If that is not a cost-effective thing for you to borrow just a couple from us to figure out what you want to go buy your own set, we will, within reason, because we have so many Kaplan sets and Exam Cracker sets, we're willing to let you borrow those books for a certain amount of time. We obviously want to have that open and available to everybody, so we don't do that regularly unless it's someone's in a bind. The AAMC package, if you don't do a full length course, is by far your best bet. Would you agree that those are the most accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
So practice exams for the AAMC. We also have two sets of all four, 5 now, 5 of the tests. And we also have the question packs that you can reach out to us and say, hey, I would like to use that instead of purchasing it. We have a 1-year subscription with that, and that was purchased by the Future Physicians Club to support the lending library. So please use our lending library, and please figure out what works best. Self-study can certainly work for the right student, but some students do need a schedule, like something to put them to work and organize them. If you're a procrastinator, if you are, you need a little investment to put a fire under your belly and say, oh, I just spent all this money, I better use it. That might be something to think about, okay? But they are expensive, you're right. They're anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000, and you're not a cheap endeavor, so I get it. So you gotta find out what works best for you.
And I would also say about the books, it's helpful to try out different books and not just necessarily go off of like what people are saying, like, oh, Kaplan will give you the best score or Blueprint will give you the best score. I was like so focused on that in the beginning that I wasn't actually reading the books for like what would help me learn the material better. And that's why I was so grateful that I got the exam cracker books from Erin and was able to try them out, because that's how I learned a lot better than the Kaplan books. And so it just depends on like your learning style, and try different books, and definitely like use the lending library. That is super helpful. So you don't have to go out and spend your money, and you can look and see what you would want to invest in. I wish I would have done that.
Total brain fart. So the question we had was the courses that you took at Boise State University that were supposed to prepare you. Do you feel that they did that for you? And do you wish there would have been some other classes you would have taken that would have been more beneficial?
I think that they did. I mean, you have to put the work into those classes, though. Those prereq classes are not like free-for-alls where you just get an easy A. You have to put the work in those classes to get the A, And I think because I did, it was helpful for me in the long run. It really was review. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I need to learn this. I didn't never know this. Like, really the content was review because of the courses at Boise State, I think. But I really took them seriously. I didn't just go through them. So
Yeah, I agree. The classes that you're taking here, this is your NCAP prep, so take it seriously. Of course, you want to get a good grade because that affects your GPA, but also think of it of the mindset of, this is preparing me for the MCAT. All of the material, like I would say probably 80% of the material that I went over were things that we actually learned in our classes. And I'm like, oh, I wish I would have listened a little bit better or tried a little bit harder during this section, because it's important now for the MCAT. So like focusing on your courses is in a sense preparing. So that's my biggest takeaway as well, is like you are doing prep for the MCAT by taking these courses and taking them seriously.
Go ahead.
So I know you guys both did gap years, but do you think, obviously having all those clinical experience hours and volunteer hours helped you with that? Like, do you guys recommend a specific number of clinical experience, or is it just not more than 7,000?
So the question is do the hours matter?
I think that's what got me into school. I had a
Is
terrible.
it the
MCAT
number
score.
though, or what you got out of it?
Well, it's hard to say because I think, well, that's a good question, because I didn't have a lot of shadowing hours, but if you can articulate what you really got out of the experience, like it doesn't matter how many hours you had, because you could just show up every day and just be like a ghost and not be able to really articulate what you learned from that experience. And it's just like, okay, so you were there for 2,000 hours and what you learn? You can't answer that question, then that we don't care type thing. But again, like having so many hours, you get so many experiences, you get to see so many different things. That was really helpful for me. And so, I mean, I had a terrible MCAT score. I had a 499, but my GPA was good. But I think that I felt confident in my application because of how I articulated my stories and my activities and my personal statement. I felt confident in myself and my abilities to explain why I want to be a physician. And I think that's probably the most important aspect, and stats, honestly.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. There is kind of like a minimum number of hours you need to meet. So you kind of need to check those boxes. But I remember panicking to Erin and I was like, I only have 60 hours of shadowing. And like a lot of other students have more than that. And she's like, okay, but is it the number of hours that you're talking about, or what was your experiences from those? Like, what was your takeaways and how can you incorporate that into your application? So it's helpful to meet those like basic requirements, like, you know, have at least 40 hours of shadowing and, you know, a certain number of clinical hours. And that's a good starting point, but you also need to think about, okay, am I actually getting something meaningful from these experiences and can I articulate that in my application? I think that's more important than just like shooting for hours.
So what it sounds like you're both saying is it wasn't necessarily the parts. It was the sum of the parts, right? Like, and because you did the hours, you gained the experience, but you were intentional in your choice to do so.
Right. And choose, yeah, exactly. Choose activities you want to do that you're interested in. Don't just go volunteer for the food bank because you need volunteer hours and you don't actually want to be there. You're not going to get anything out of it. You're not going to be able to articulate it well in your application. It's going to sound like that's what you did. You went to get hours. So it's important to find things that you're interested in. Like for me, I volunteered at Faces of Hope, it's downtown and it's a interpersonal violence center. So people who are, you know, being abused, they can come in and get care. And I just volunteered at the front desk. And a lot of times you could go in and like with the clients, but it impacted me so much that I was like, okay, I'm going to continue to do this. Probably going to focus on this more than other volunteer experiences because I got a lot out of this. And that's where I kind of like based all of my volunteer and wrote a really good, you know, story about it in my application that I think spoke volumes and got a lot of questions about it in my interview as well. So it doesn't really matter. You don't need like all these avenues. You don't need, oh, I need volunteer here, I need volunteer here. Like I dedicated all my volunteering to that place because I loved it and I got in. So
would you agree that sometimes you had to try something out a couple of times and be like, oh, I didn't like that, and somebody go do this? But it might still have been relevant on your application because it was the travel,
right,
getting to there, being like, this
exactly.
is the thing that's most meaningful.
Yeah. Like you don't exclude things like, oh, I probably should put that in because I did like 5 hours of it. Like you're telling a story in your application, right? Like you're not, I mean, you don't really want to sell yourself, but at the same time, like you want to tell this story of how you got to this point of, okay, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to help the community. I want to help patients, you know, things like that. It's a story at the end of the day. It's not some like, you know, this is why you should choose me type thing.
It's not a job description.
Yeah.
It should never be a job description.
Tell a
Ever.
story about a patient or a client or a situation that you were in that literally impacted you, rather than I showed up and I answered the phones and I did this and I did that. Don't
Well,
write
anybody
something
could
Yeah.
put that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And for me, it was a little bit different. Like there was times when I'm like, okay, I need more clinical hours or I need more volunteer work. So I just went and picked an experience. And I don't think that's a bad way to go necessarily, because then you can always take something away from that. Like I remember one of my shadowing experiences I did not particularly like, and that's important because that's still something you learn about yourself and about something that you can convey through your interview and your application. So even if you hated the experience, you're going to learn something from it. And you can use that still on your application. So I wouldn't necessarily just like only go for things that you're super interested in, because you still need those requirements. And maybe you don't want to volunteer as much, but you need those hours, pick somewhere and then get a takeaway from that. And I think that's really important, is everything you do, you can find the takeaway.
Zoom room, do we have any questions? You guys have been a little bit quiet for a little while. Shannon's been keeping you going. Jackson.
I don't know, maybe this is just kind of a fun question, but what was it like getting that email that said you got in?
Well, it wasn't always an email, but, what was it like
Okay, the,
acceptance? So how did Rocky Vista do it? Did they do it by email?
They called me. I was at work and I got a phone call from St. George, Utah, and I'm like, well, this can only mean one or another thing, and so I should step out. And when I answered, I like immediately broke in tears. I couldn't even talk to the lady. And kind of stepped out of my office and called literally everyone I know, and told them that I did it. I got accepted. I'm gonna be a doctor. It was the best feeling ever.
Yeah, I agree. So the one for Icon, when I got accepted, was an email. And that was just like super relieving because it wasn't necessarily my top choice school, but just knowing that I got accepted somewhere and I could be a doctor, like this is actually happening. And then my one for UW was a call, and that one was totally unexpected because I was the one I was second guessing all of my responses and I thought I did terrible. And so just like the rewarding feeling of like, okay, it's actually paying off. All my hard work is like coming true, and you can start to like envision yourself in medical school and being a physician. And it's really, really exciting because up until that point, it's kind of like, you don't think about it. It's taboo. You're going through the process. But when you actually like get your acceptance, it's the best feeling ever.
All your hard work pays off.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that probably surprises a lot of you that they call, and they do. A lot of schools call and do the phone call, and it's kind of fun because when it does pop up and say something that you know is somebody you should, like University of Washington. Oh,
Yeah.
I better take this. I was driving home from work and I was like, oh my gosh, should I even answer? Should I I'm like, oh, we're off the road. Yeah. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, that was a good moment.
And if there's any takeaways you can give to these lovely people, they did make sure that they spoke to their letter writers and their academic advisors who love to jump up and down and cry a lot for them, which I did. You didn't get to see it because you both emailed me, but I did a lot of jumping and a lot of crying.
And remember to send all of your people that wrote you like letters of recommendation, like fill them in too, because they're excited for you. And they want to know like when you get in and you're like where you are in the process. And so that's really fun too, to share with everyone that's supported you through the process.
Shannon
Really
just
just want everyone to know.
Shannon just commented to my comment about crying. She says, I saw it. It really did happen.
Oh,
Yeah, there was crying. Morgan, you and Maysen both. I walked into her office in tears because I was just so excited for you both. It's meaningful for us all. Thanks for asking that question, Jackson. What else?
I like that question.
yeah.
I like that question too. What else? This is the chance. They're not, there isn't a question that I haven't, this is them. I mean, I'm thrilled that they're saying the things I want them to say, but I didn't coach them. They're saying what they want. So if you want the skinny, you better ask them.
Yeah, when you guys take anatomy and physiology,
Yes.
do you take that before the MCAT or you, oh, yeah, you guys did. Do you think that helped with your MCAT at all?
Yes, there's a lot of systems questions like digestive system, cardiovascular system, and that was very helpful. Like
And that was
action
like back in your
potential.
freshman year of bio.
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions about that too, which I thought was super helpful to take anatomy and physiology, and just to know, like, I feel like it's helpful to know, like, okay, yeah, I do want to treat, these things that are happening in people.
I feel
It's
like,
helpful.
yeah, I feel like anatomy and physiology was like an important class to take, but I feel like the topics that were more on my MCAT were like chemistry and biochem heavy.
That was gonna be my question, was how much biochemistry did you see on it?
So much, like every single section of the MCAT has biochem and biology worked into it. Even like
if
the
it's not
physics. Yeah.
biochem section,
Yeah.
it's in chem phys, it's in psych
Yeah.
social,
It's
well, it's not in
everywhere.
ours, but
And that was one of the things that surprised me when I was starting to study for the MCAT, is like these topics are weaved into every single section. And so just like doing those practice questions made you realize. And another thing that like I'm sure you guys will know, but I didn't, was studying for the MCAT. It's not like question and answers. it's passages, you read the passage and then you answer questions about the passage. And so that is just like a whole different way of like test taking that I wasn't used to. And so lots of
Absolutely.
practice tests and save your double AMC until like you're
Very
actually
last.
ready to do
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
The final stretch.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, all of your classes are gonna like be helpful and they're all gonna weave into all the questions, but biochem, biology, those were like heavy in every single section.
So Leila wants to know, do interviews ask what kind of specialty you want to have and why? Or some similar report? Do they ask you about what specialty you want?
Yeah, both of mine did. My one at ICOM asked me if I wanted to be an ophthalmologist because I work in like the eye clinic right now, and I actually don't. And so like sharing my reason for that was like enlightening as well. And then UW is #1 in primary care. And so of course they're going to ask a question about, do you want to be in primary care or family physician? And so yeah, each of mine definitely asked questions about that.
So it sounds like to me was the specialty one was more because you
Yeah.
had that experience on your application so much. And you know, the family practice, I can see the family practice question coming up quite a bit, you know, but I don't think it's a question whether it's right or wrong. I don't think they're gonna go, shame on you, you want to be a you don't want to be a family practice doctor, you can't work, you can't go to school here. Because they have people going into lots of different specialties all over.
Right.
They're there to train you to be the physician that you want to be. But that's a great question, Leila.
Mhm.
Hopefully that answered it.
Yeah, I didn't get any questions like that, so
Yeah.
it depends on the school.
And even if some schools don't necessarily like have physicians in that specialty, it's okay if you still want to do it. And if you say like that's what you're interested in, I think that's also kind of enlightening for you and for the school. I don't know, it's kind of fun to talk about like what you're passionate about and what you could see yourself in, but also don't like be too attached to that because it will probably change.
So 30% of the students who say, I'm gonna be, change their mind.
Yes.
30% of the students who say that. That's not a small number, but it's not a big number either.
Mhm.
So I think they want you to all go in with open minds and be flexible because you really don't know what kind of doctor you really want to be until you're actually doing it.
Yeah, I have a second-year student at Rocky Vista who I reached out to because I was curious if I wanted to do something competitive, like how I kind of start that as a first-year student. And he was telling me that he initially wanted to do ortho, was like gung-ho, like nothing else, I'm not gonna change my mind. And then he's not even in his rotations and now he wants to do urology. Like it completely changes. And so it's important to keep in mind.
Other questions?
So what are you guys thinking about doing right now, like specializing?
I just want to do family medicine or like OBGYN. Those were my two top right now. And I thought all through my undergrad that I wanted to be an ER physician. And you also have to kind of look at like the lifestyle of the type of physician. Like ER is a lot of nights and being called in and working late. And like in my future, I want to have more of like a set schedule. And so it's important to factor in like the lifestyle of different types of physicians. And as you get older, it will change because at that time I'm like, oh, I definitely want to do that. But also when I graduate and I'm done with med school, I'll be in my 30s. I probably want kids at that time. And so it's important to like factor that stuff in too.
Maysen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I work for an orthopedic surgeon, and so I think I'm gung-ho on orthopedic surgery, but I'm keeping an open mind because it's the most competitive specialty. And I think I want to do surgery in general because I like the OR, but I do want to have a family, and so the residency of general surgery or surgery in general is, you know, a very, what's the word I'm thinking of? It's a lot. You don't have a lot of time outside of the residency. And so that's one thing that I'm kind of hesitant on because I do want to have kids and be present in their lives and things like that. So we'll just see how it works.
You could do it.
Yeah, we'll just see what happens.
Sure. Any other questions from the Zoom room? Okay. Did either of you consider PA school or medical school in the beginning, and why did you choose to be a physician?
So I actually went into undergrad pre-nursing. And after my first semester decided to do pre-med. I kind of just had like an existential crisis and was like, I don't want to be a nurse. I guess I'll just be a doctor. And then my experience reinforced that. I think I was just kind of lucky in the fact I didn't really have like a reason why I chose like pre-med versus pre-PA. But I work really closely with the PAs in the office that I work with now. And so working with them, I was like, wait, maybe I want to be a PA. But that was after I purchased my blueprint package. So I did kind of waver back and forth between PA and med school for a few probably weeks. But I ultimately like the difference between PA and med, like doctor is I was like, if I'm going to be the doctor in the OR, I don't want to be the assist. I want to be like the surgeon. So I was like, okay, so that obviously takes PA school out of the picture.
So you wanted the autonomy, it sounds like.
Right.
And mine was kind of similar. I was pre-nursing when I started undergrad.
That's so funny.
But mine was more, I never like wanted to do nursing. I was a CNA at a point in time, but I like always have in my head, I want a backup plan. And so I'm like, nursing is a good degree. You can like work out of college, but you also have to think like, that's like a whole nother program and that's going to be a whole nother set of stress. And so that's why I was like, health science will get me done sooner. It will meet all the requirements for medical school. So I never really like thought about a different career path. I was just kind of thinking about backup plans. And then, yeah, I'm trying to think of what the other part of the question was. Why did we want to be a doctor?
Why did you choose physician?
Okay. So, I mean, that goes into your whole like personal statement. So what makes you want to be a
So
physician?
you want my personal statement?
Yeah, I'll send
Yeah.
it. Mine is like, I didn't have a lot of experience with healthcare, like growing up. I was in a single mom raising 6 kids. And so healthcare was kind of like a taboo thing, or like we didn't have much experience with it. And so I didn't even know it was something I was interested in until high school. And I attended Meridian Medical Arts Charter High School. And that's where I was able to like figure out that I wanted to be a physician. And I was able to shadow physicians early on and see that I really wanted to be the biggest advocate for my patient. And being a physician, you're totally in control of being your patient's advocate and connecting them to resources. And like your front lines, you're their resource. And that sounded just like very appealing and exactly what I wanted to do. But yeah, but personal statement right there.
Other questions?
So going back to that personal statement, you guys didn't just have one click moment. You guys just talked about like multiple experiences kind of in that personal statement of like what led to that moment instead of just like, oh,
Yeah.
there it is.
So the question
That's a
was
good
about the
question.
personal statement, and was it just like one moment or a whole bunch of moments, or?
That's a really good question because I struggled with that. Like for the longest time, I felt like any like personal statement, the guy that I'd go to was like, what was that one moment? You have to figure that out. Like you need to do that. And I was like, I did not have one. Like I'm obviously can't be a doctor. And so it's a good question because you don't need to have that one moment. Like in my personal statement, I started with like when I decided that this was like going to be a good career for me when I was a scribe. Like I was already, pursuing medical school at that point. And so that's kind of where I started off my personal statement and then like reinforced it with other experiences. I never even got to like this is when I decided and this is what I've done to do it. So that's a really good question because you don't need to have that like moment. If you do have it, it's nice because then you're like, oh yeah, so like, this thing happened. And a lot of people I know are like, I was in a car accident and then the doctor that treated me in the ER, like he really treated me, things like that, but I never had that, so.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, it's a personal statement. So it's personal. It's you. You get to bring yourself to the table. And I think that's beautiful because that allows you a lot of freedom. So when you apply to medical school, there's no prompt. You get to decide what it says. And I could probably put Morgan and Mason's personal statements up against each other, and they're different. And they're neither wrong nor right. They're just theirs. And the key is it's hard to have a 360-degree view of yourself. That's actually what you truly need. You need to be able to look yourself in the mirror and be excited to see what you see before you and be positive about that and be willing to be open to sharing exactly what makes you tick. You know, some personal statements don't have any medical ring to them, in a sense that maybe they connect to the medicine world. One of our students wrote about hunting and how it's like medicine for him. When you read it though, it's really about his relationship with his dad and what his dad has brought to him. And so everybody's is different. You know, everybody has their own little thing. And so we can help you with that. We can help you figure out how to construct that. But here's the key. You have to start now. You have to start being willing to write about yourself now so it doesn't overwhelm the crap out of you and you go, oh my gosh, I don't have time to do this. If you know yourself, if you are able to write about yourself, you're going to have so much more success. We're going to be able to bring out the best in you because we'll see all that writing. We'll see its power and its impact. I still owe you an Amazon gift card. I know. So you need to be able to do that. And I start out the year with the application process students and I say what? 85% of the application is writing about yourself. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And it is interesting because you don't realize how much you actually are writing about yourself, because I felt like in the process, I was like, okay, what do I felt like I was like trying to figure myself out. Like, do I even know who I am? It's a lot of trying to figure out who you are. In hindsight, I agree, it's beautiful. But in the time, it's like, I hate this and I don't want to do this and I need therapy.
And I don't want Erin to see it again.
Yeah.
Don't let that scare you away from coming to see me though.
Yeah, that was the most helpful.
It was.
It's therapeutic, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, did you ever say you want to go to medical school because you wanted to help people, and how did you get past that?
Don't say that.
Don't
by the
say
way.
that. That's terrible. Everyone says that.
Yeah. You
Well,
can
how
help
did you get
people
past
by
it?
being a cook at a restaurant. You can
Yeah.
help someone by being their mailman and bringing them mail. Like, that does not tell anyone why you want to be a physician.
But how did you get past it? Because we know that's the initial instinct. That's the gut check reaction. How did you get past it?
So everyone wants to help, and that's why everyone is going to med school. But what does helping look like to you? For me, like I said, my biggest thing was being an advocate for my patients. And that's how helping patients looked for me. And so you kind of have to like, okay, yes, that's why everyone goes to medical school, but what's the real reason? Like, why do you want to help people? And yeah, find like that little niche about like helping people and like kind of spin it. So it's still helping people, but it doesn't sound like that. And so I don't know, that would be my advice.
It is hard to articulate. One story that I used in my personal statement that I actually ended up taking out, but that I did like, was I was shadowing a family physician one time and she was amazing. Like, oh, it's very hard, I think, for a lot of people, myself too. It's like someone comes in with a diagnosis. It's hard to not look like you're looking kind of blindly at this diagnosis and the reasons why, you know, the underlying conditions and things like that. But this physician was so good at like kind of opening up her blinders and being like, well, what's your home situation like? Do you have a clean environment, things like that? And it turns out that this patient was like chronically ill. She always had like some type of cold or something, lung issues. Turns out that she has like mold growing in her house, and this physician like figured it out by just asking those type of questions. And that really opened my eyes, because I was like, okay, wait a minute, like being a doctor is not just like, oh, let me give you this medicine and then you're gonna feel better and you're not gonna have like lung issues. Well, and like the real situation was that she needed, someone to come clean out the mold in her house and she'd be able to breathe better. And I was like, wow, that was really insightful. Like, I feel like that's what I want to do for people. Like, I want them to come in and I can say, okay, how's your living situation? Like, is there some underlying issue rather than your lungs are breaking in half? You know what I mean? So that was one of the reasons that I put. I liked, being able to help someone in the regard of like getting them a better home access or rather than just giving them medication, like a lot of people think doctors do, so.
We have time for one more question. Zoom room, do you want it? Is there someone that's chomping at the bit? I'm gonna have both these ladies come over to the computer and put their email addresses if they want. I know Morgan would like to sell her books and I don't think she ever wants to see them again, so somebody needs to buy them from her. Maysen, if you're interested in sharing your contact information with these folks, I'll have you put that in the chat and then I can get it to the two people who are in the room. And then also, I just would like to extend a very congratulations on getting accepted to medical school. I ask that you play with the acceptance day. It's going to be fun. And I would ask that everybody in the Zoom room watch for acceptance day. We'll be posting it to social media, but we'll also be posting it on our pre-professional website. So you can see all the folks that have been accepted to all sorts of programs, whether it be PT, OT, med, and you get to see them flash in their new outfits or at their new location. So it's very exciting. That will be May 2nd. That will start the social media posts, but we'll be taking them out throughout the summer because here's the bottom line. You get accepted and then sometimes you go on a wait list. And sometimes you stay on that wait list almost 2 or 3 days before this program starts. And you rush off and you jump on an airplane and you go to medical school. So we will be receiving those acceptances all summer long. It's very fun for us. This is my favorite session just because I think it's wonderful for you to hear from students that it's real and it does happen. Okay, so I'll have you two come over here and then I'll stay in the room and hang tight. I am going to take the recording off.